Paul, we're talking Emerald Bowl, Oregon State versus Maryland. Give us your assessment. It seems like these two teams are maybe more similar than people might realize at first glance.
I thought we were going to talk about the fact that my team got hosed out of the number 3 bowl slot and should be in El Paso instead of saying, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to go to El Paso. No, actually, yeah, I think they are very similar because both teams have gone through an inordinate amount of injuries. Both teams had their ups and downs during the season. They had some terrible games and some not so terrible games. I think the key thing the Oregon State coaches have talked about with this Maryland team is the fact that it's not your typical 6-6 team because they could have easily won 9 or 10 games, which would have put them in a different level entirely. So the fact they're much better than 6-6 and the fact they're getting much healthier lends everybody at OSU to believe that this is going to be a much closer game than maybe some of the Pac-10 fans might want to think.
Both teams had some pretty big wins. Oregon State, knocked off Cal when Cal was number 2. Maryland beat Boston College. I guess talk a little bit about the level of play that we might see in this bowl game versus, what one might expect from it's the Emerald Bowl, but maybe it's going to be a better matchup than people might think.
I think the turning point in Maryland's season, I believe they were 2-2 or 2-3. The fans were kind of getting on Friedgen a little bit and getting on their defensive coordinator a lot. And they turned around and I believe they beat Rutgers. Either Rutgers or Boston College. But anyway, they've been up and down, but they managed to win the games they needed to win. They kind of limped into the bowl thing, but they've beaten the number 8 and number 10 teams in the country, which says something about how good they are when they're playing well. The Beavers, they beat a number 2 Cal team earlier in the season, which looked like a huge win on the surface, and then it turns out Cal wasn't very good by the end of the season. But then Oregon State wins 6 of its last 7 games and is one of the hottest teams in the country going into this thing. So you combine Oregon State being hot, Maryland maybe being in better shape physically, and on the surface it could be a very good game, but on the other hand, who knows what's going to happen when both teams have had a month off. I mean, from these coaches' perspective, you don't know who's going to show up in a month, so it kind of depends on who's more ready to play and who has the biggest chip on their shoulder. And I think if Oregon State has this attitude that the number 3 Pac-10 team is going to kick the butt of the number 4 or 5 ACC team automatically just because the Pac-10 is a better conference, I think they're going to be in trouble.
You mentioned that you had no real interest in going to El Paso. Do you feel like the players felt the same way? I know DeCarolis was a little bit upset after the announcement, but did you get the sense in the past couple of weeks that the players are just fine with going to San Francisco instead of El Paso?
I think they are. The main thing you got to remember is the Pac-10's bowl arrangements aren't very good. I mean, the ACC for like 3 years in a row has had 7 or 8 teams in bowls, and there's some pretty good bowls, decent weather bowls. The fact that the number 3 bowl game in the Pac-10 is considered kind of so-so by players. I mean, they had fun in El Paso to a certain extent. The people are great, incredibly friendly, but nobody wanted to go back. They said they were bored to death. What they wanted to do was go to San Diego, and play in that bowl, but it didn't work out because of the BCS thing. So San Diego was their first choice. And then San Francisco, they love the fact that it's the Bay Area where a lot of these guys are from, and they're not going to freeze to death, and they don't look over their shoulder at another country like El Paso. So I think they're very happy with San Francisco, even though it grates on them a little bit that a Duck team that folded down the stretch gets the number 3 spot, and they're in the number 4 spot.
As you mentioned, a lot of Bay Area guys on the Oregon State team. What kind of a boost do you think it's going to give the Beavers recruiting to be playing their bowl game there?
It's a huge area for Oregon State. It's a huge area for the Ducks too. I think it'll give their recruiting a pretty good shot. Although there's so many games on TV that it's maybe not as much of a factor to actually be there. I don't think it would help Oregon State's cause too much if they fall on their face and get hammered by the 4th or 5th place team in the ACC. But I also don't think that there's a tremendous impact with what happens in the game in relation to how well they do in the Bay Area recruiting. But there's a lot of kids from the Bay Area on the Oregon State roster.
Let's talk X's and O's a little bit. Oregon State's going to be led by Lyle Moyval. He's only making his 3rd or 4th start, I think. How do you expect that to go? How do you see the matchups, Oregon State's offense versus Maryland's defense and vice versa?
Maryland's defense is kind of hard to figure because they've been horrible at times and they've been okay at times. And you have to also consider the level of competition. But on the other hand, I mean, the Oregon State offense I've watched during the course of the year hasn't been anything to write home about for a lot of the season. They've had injuries, ups and downs. They're playing their number 2 quarterback. But it seemed like late in the year, I mean, the game at Washington State, the Oregon game, they managed to score some points, despite being very limited in some areas, limited at wide receiver, depending heavily on true freshmen like Darrell Catchings and James Rogers. But they seem to have made the most of their scoring opportunities. So, to me, it's a big unknown how they'll do against Maryland's defense. I mean, I see Oregon State moving the ball because Evanston Bernard's going to be back. That's a huge plus, although Matt Severson was a great stand-in in the Civil War game. Moyval, he keeps surprising people. I mean, he's undefeated. He's 3-0 as a starter. He seems to have the confidence of his teammates. And he's kind of, you look at this guy and you wonder how this can be a winning big-time quarterback, but he continually gets the job done. So, you know, maybe he'll surprise us again. But I think Oregon State will move the ball, and I think the Maryland defense will have trouble, keeping Oregon State out of the 20s.
How about Oregon State's defense versus Maryland's offense?
To me, the one place where Oregon State has an edge in this game is they have a better defense than Maryland. But on the other hand, Maryland is a pretty balanced offense. Ralph Friedgen believes in a lot of balance. He's got 2 workhorse running backs and one really fast number 3 back who could be a factor. They've got pretty good speed. I think if Maryland managed to get ahead early and maybe control the ball on the ground, it could be a tough game for OSU.
So, Paul, give us your prediction then. Score prediction. What you think? How you think it's going to unfold?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm going to go with South Florida 34, Oregon 17.
How about for the Emerald?
Oh, the Emerald Bowl. Oregon State 28, Maryland 21.